On a hot summer day in June 1876, the quiet plains of Montana echoed with the sounds of battle. This was the scene of one of the most infamous clashes in American history, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. General George Armstrong Custer, a bold and ambitious leader, led his troops against the combined forces of the Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes. At their helm were legendary leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, united in their resistance to the encroaching settlers and US military. This battle, also known as Custer's Last Stand, wasn't just a clash of arms, but a pivotal moment to the struggle for the West. Join us as we delve into the events leading up to this dramatic encounter, the strategies employed, and the lasting legacy of this historic fight. Welcome to our journey through history, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. The Great Plains, consisting out of modern-day North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Montana, Wyoming, Minnesota, and Iowa, was home to diverse and vibrant Native American cultures called the Northern Plains Indians. Their lives revolved around the buffalo, which provided food, clothing, and shelter. Renowned for their horsemanship and hunting skills, the Northern Plains Indians were adept warriors and hunters, moving with the seasons to follow the herds that sustained them. Life on the Northern Plains was rich with tradition and community, from storytelling around the fire to elaborate ceremonies honoring the spirits. These tribes nurtured deep connections with each other and their environment, but their way of life was under threat when thousands of European settlers and prospectors flooded the area in search of gold. The movement of settlers encroaching on Lakota territory led to overhunting of buffalo and other game, depletion of timber, and contamination of water sources. This environmental degradation directly affected the Lakota's ability to sustain their communities, leading to skirmishes and confrontations. As a result of this, the United States began to establish military fortifications like Fort Phil Kearny, Fort Reno, and Fort Smith that served as bases for military operations against the Lakota, further escalating tensions. The establishment of U.S. Army forts on Indian territory violated the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, which had guaranteed the land to the Lakota, and so the prominent leader and war chief of the Ogallala Lakota Indians, Red Cloud, along with other native tribe leaders, organized a sustained campaign of resistance against the U.S. military presence, starting the Red Cloud's War of 1866 to 1868. One of the most notable battles of Red Cloud's War was Red Cloud's orchestrated ambush that resulted into the death of Captain William J. Fetterman and 80 of his soldiers. This event demonstrated the tactical superiority of the Lakota warriors and their ability to defend their territory effectively. Red Cloud sustained his campaign by leading numerous successful attacks on military forts and supply lines, significantly hampering the US military's ability to operate in the region. Red Cloud's effective resistance forced the US government to negotiate. The treaty resulted in the US agreeing to abandon the Bozeman Trail and dismantle the forts along its route, returning the Powder River country to the Lakota. This marked a significant victory for Red Cloud and his people. The treaty brought a temporary peace and a period of relative stability for the Native American tribes, but would eventually cease to exist after the discovery of gold in the Black Hills in the mid-1870s. This led to an influx of miners and settlers violating the treaty and escalating tensions once again. The violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty and encroachment on Native American lands resulted into the Great Sioux War of 1876 to 1877. In November 1875, the US government sent representatives to meet with the leaders of the Sioux tribes to demand that they move onto reservations. The message was clear and uncompromising. The Native American tribes were ordered to return to their designated reservations by January 31, 1876. This ultimatum applied to all Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and associated tribes living outside the reservation boundaries, particularly those in the Powder River country. The message warned that any tribes or individuals who failed to comply and didn't return to the reservations by the deadline would be considered hostile and subject to military action. When the tribes didn't move to the reservations by the January 31 deadline, the US Army was ordered to force them onto the reservations. In early 1876, the US Army initiated a coordinated three-pronged assault into the Sioux Territory. The objective was to converge on Indian strongholds in Montana, particularly targeting the region around the Little Bighorn and Powder Rivers. The plan was to trap the Sioux and Cheyenne between the three columns, cutting off their escape routes and compelling their surrender. General Crook's southern column commenced its march from Fort Fetterman in the Wyoming Territory. Crook's forces included infantry and cavalry regiments, along with Crow and Shoshone Indian scouts. It took them several weeks to reach Powder River on March 17, 1876. Crook's column fought an exhausting battle at Rosebud Creek against Sioux and Cheyenne forces led by Crazy Horse. The battle was inconclusive, and Crook's forces, exhausted and low on supplies, retreated to their base at Goose Creek, effectively removing them from the coordinated effort. Colonel John Gibbon's western column commenced its march from Fort Ellis in Montana Territory. His force consisted of infantry and cavalry units, including the 7th Infantry and elements of the 2nd Cavalry. Gibbon's column moved eastward along the Yellowstone River, aiming to link up with Terry's forces. Gibbon's force was to secure the western approaches and cut off any retreat to the west by the Native American forces. General Terry's eastern column starting point was Fort Abraham Lincoln in the Dakota Territory. His force included the 7th Cavalry under Lieutenant Colonel Custer, along with infantry and artillery units. Terry's column moved westward along the Yellowstone River. His plan with Gibbon was to create a pincer movement from the east and west. While the Terry-Gibbon column was marching toward the mouth of the Little Bighorn, on the evening of June 24, Custer's native scouts arrived at an overlook known as the Crow Nest, 14 miles east of the Little Bighorn River. At sunrise at June 25, Custer scouts reported they could see a massive pony herd and signs of the Native American village, roughly 50 miles in the distance. Custer scouts also spotted the regimental cooking fires that could be seen from 10 miles away, disclosing the regiment's position. Custer contemplated a surprise attack against the encampment the following morning of June 26, but he then received a report informing him that several hostiles had discovered the trail left by his troops. Assuming his presence had been exposed, Custer decided to attack the village without further delay. On the morning of June 25, Custer divided his 12 companies into 3 battalions in anticipation of the forthcoming engagement. 3 companies were placed under the command of Major Marcus Reno, and 3 were placed under the command of Captain Frederick Benteen. 5 companies remained under Custer's immediate command. The 12th Company B under Captain Thomas McDougall had been assigned to escort the slower pack train carrying provisions and additional ammunition. Unknown to Custer, the group of Native Americans seen on his trail was actually leaving the encampment and did not alert the rest of the village. Custer's scouts warned him about the size of the village, with Mitch Boyer reportedly saying, "General, I have been with these Indians for 30 years, and this is the largest village I have ever heard of." Custer's overriding concern was that the Native American group would break up and scatter. He commanded his forces to approach the village at noon and prepare to attack in full daylight. With an impending sense of doom, the Crow scout Half Yellow Face prophetically warned Custer, "You and I are going home today by a road we do not know." On June 25, 1876, Major Reno's detachment was the first to attack after receiving orders from Custer. Reno's force crossed the Little Bighorn River around 3 p.m. and quickly realized they faced a large prepared Native American force. Advancing rapidly, Reno's men were initially concealed by trees, but soon found themselves within range of the Hunkpapa Sioux village. Upon seeing the village extend, Reno suspected a trap and halted his advance. He ordered his troops to dismount and form a skirmish line, reducing their firepower. As Reno's men fired into the village, Sioux warriors, enraged by the deaths of some of their families, began a counterattack. Reno's line held briefly, but was soon overwhelmed by a concentrated attack on their left flank. Forced to retreat into the timber, Reno's men were pinned down and under heavy fire. In the chaos, Reno's Arikara scout Bloody Knife was killed, splattering Reno with blood. Shaken, Reno ordered a disorganized retreat across the river, abandoning the wounded. The retreat turned into a rout with soldiers picked off by close-quarter attacks by the Cheyenne. Reno's command suffered significant casualties during the retreat and river crossing, with 3 officers and 29 troopers killed and more missing or left behind. Following the retreat to Reno Hill, Major Reno's shaken troops were joined by Captain Benteen's column around half an hour later. Benteen had been summoned by a message from Custer, but despite hearing heavy gunfire, Reno insisted on waiting for the pack train to resupply his men before moving. Reinforced by McDougal's Company B and the pack train, the 14 officers and 340 troopers on the bluffs dug rifle pits for defense. Although they heard distinct volleys at 4:20 p.m. from Custer's direction, Benteen focused on reinforcing Reno instead of advancing to help Custer. The entrenched companies eventually followed Ware, but increasing attacks from native warriors forced them back to Reno Hill. They remained pinned down, defending against assaults for 3 hours until nightfall, during which time they dug trenches and witnessed the Indians performing war dances. During the skirmishes, Benteen was hit in the heel by a bullet and led a counterattack to repel close approaching Indians. The companies held their defensive positions on the bluff through the night. On June 25, Reno and Benteen's men positioned on Reno Hill remained unaware of Custer's fate until General Terry arrived on June 27. Custer's force of about 210 men was engaged by the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne, approximately 3.5 miles north of Reno and Benteen's positions. The soldiers found Custer's men dead, stripped, and mutilated, making identification difficult. Custer himself had 2 fatal gunshot wounds, one to his chest and one to his temple. Curley, a Crow scout, reported that Custer had attacked the village after attempting to cross the river but was driven back. Other accounts vary, with some suggesting he died at the river, while others, like Chief Gall's, claim he never reached the river. Cheyenne oral tradition credits Buffalo Calf Road woman with delivering the blow that knocked Custer off his horse. The scattered Sioux and Cheyenne feasted and celebrated during July with no threat from US soldiers. After their celebrations, many of the natives returned to the reservation. Soon, the number of warriors amounted to only about 600. Both Crook and Terry remained immobile for 7 weeks after the battle, awaiting reinforcements and unwilling to venture out against the Sioux and Cheyenne until they had at least 2,000 men. Crook and Terry finally took to the field against the native forces in August. General Nelson Miles took command of the effort in October 1876. In May 1877, Sitting Bull escaped to Canada. Within days, Crazy Horse surrendered at Fort Robinson, Nebraska. The Great Sioux War ended on May 7 with General Miles' defeat of a remaining band of Miniconjou Sioux Indians. To understand the Battle of the Alamo, we must first explore the complex history that led to this pivotal moment. In the early 1800s, Texas was part of the vast Spanish territory known as New Spain. Following Mexico's independence from Spain in 1821, Texas became a part of the newly established Mexican nation. During this period, the Mexican government sought to populate and develop the sparsely settled region of Texas. They encouraged immigration by offering land grants to settlers. One of the first to take advantage of this opportunity was Moses Austin, an American settler who secured permission to bring 300 American families to Texas. After Moses Austin's death, his son Stephen Austin fulfilled his father's vision, bringing in settlers who later became known as the Old 300. The settlers, primarily from the United States, were attracted by the promise of land and economic opportunity. However, cultural and political differences between the settlers and the Mexican government quickly emerged. The settlers, who were used to the democratic traditions of the United States, found it difficult to adapt to the centralized and often authoritarian Mexican rule. In 1833, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna rose to power in Mexico, initially presenting himself as a federalist who would support greater autonomy for the Mexican states. However, once in power, Santa Anna shifted to a centralist government. government, abolishing the Constitution of 1824, which had guaranteed states' rights, and imposing stricter controls from Mexico City. These actions sparked unrest throughout Mexico, particularly in Texas, where settlers began to resist Mexican authority. Tensions escalated as the settlers sought to restore the Federalist Constitution and secure more autonomy for Texas. The Texans, as they called themselves, formed militias and began to take control of local governments. In October 1835, open conflict erupted at the Battle of Gonzales, often considered the first battle of the Texas Revolution. Following this, Texan delegates convened a consultation, a provisional government that declared Texas's right to self-defense against Santa Anna's tyranny. The Texan forces, although poorly equipped and trained, achieved a series of victories against Mexican garrisons, capturing key locations such as Goliad and San Antonio. During this period, leaders like Sam Houston, Stephen Austin, and James Fannin emerged, rallying support for the Texan cause. One of the critical strategic points was the Alamo, a former Spanish mission in San Antonio de Bejar. The Texan forces fortified the Alamo, recognizing its strategic importance in controlling the region. By early 1836, approximately 300 Texan defenders occupied the Alamo, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel William Travis and renowned frontiersman James Bowie. Travis, a young and determined lawyer-turned-soldier, shared command with Bowie, a seasoned adventurer famous for his formidable knife-fighting skills. Despite their differences, both men were committed to holding the Alamo against any Mexican attack. They were soon joined by Davy Crooked, a former U.S. congressman and a legendary frontiersman, who arrived with a small group of Tennessee volunteers, adding both strength and morale to the garrison. As the Texans prepared to defend the Alamo, Santa Anna was already on the march with a large and disciplined army. His goal was clear: to suppress the Texan rebellion and reassert Mexican control over Texas. Santa Anna's troops arrived in San Antonio on February 23, 1836, beginning the siege of the Alamo. The siege lasted for 13 grueling days. Santa Anna's forces bombarded the Alamo with artillery, aiming to weaken the defenders' resolve. Despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, the Texans held their ground, hoping for reinforcements from the Texan army. Inside the Alamo, conditions were dire. Food and ammunition were running low, and the constant bombardment took its toll on both the physical structure and the defenders' morale. Travis's famous letter, written during the siege, pleaded for help, ending with the defiant words, "Victory or death." In his letter, Travis wrote, "To the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, fellow citizens and compatriots, I am besieged by thousands or more of Mexicans under Santa Anna. I have sustained a continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours, and I haven't lost a man. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion. Otherwise, the garrison are to put to the sword if the fort is taken. I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat." Travis's plea for reinforcements reached General Sam Houston, but he faced immense difficulties in mobilizing a timely response. Houston was consolidating forces and strategizing for a larger campaign. The Texans at the Alamo, despite their isolation, represented a critical part of Houston's broader strategy to delay Santa Anna and weaken his forces. In the pre-dawn hours of March 6, 1836, Santa Anna launched a final, full-scale assault on the Alamo. Mexican troops attacked from multiple directions, overwhelming the already exhausted defenders. Despite a valiant resistance, the Texans were ultimately overrun. The battle was brutal, with fierce hand-to-hand combat within the compound's walls. Nearly all the Texan defenders were killed, including Travis, Bowie, and Crooked. Accounts vary, but it is believed that only a few women, children, and slaves survived the battle. Santa Anna's troops suffered significant casualties as well, with estimates of around 600 Mexican soldiers killed or wounded. The fall of the Alamo was a devastating defeat for the Texans, but it became a rallying point for the cause of Texan independence. The cry of "Remember the Alamo" inspired Texan forces in subsequent battles. Just over a month later, on April 21, 1836, General Sam Houston led the Texan army to a decisive victory at the Battle of San Jacinto, capturing Santa Ana and securing Texas independence. August 11, 1868, Beecher Island, Colorado. The dawn breaks over the eastern plains, and with it comes an onslaught of relentless chaos. A detachment of 50 scouts under the command of Major George Forsyth is about to face an overwhelming force of nearly 1,000 Native American warriors. Outnumbered and isolated, Forsyth's men prepare for a desperate stand that will determine their survival. This is the Battle of Beecher Island. To understand the significance of the Battle of Beecher Island, we must first delve into the turbulent history of the American West in the mid-19th century. This was a time of expansion, conflict, and profound change. The United States, driven by the ideology of manifest destiny, sought to expand its territory westward, often at the expense of Native American tribes who had lived on these lands for centuries. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 sparked a massive migration westward. Thousands of European settlers, miners, and adventurers traveled along the Oregon and California trails, cutting through the heart of Native American territories. The influx of settlers brought new opportunities but also significant challenges and conflicts. Treaties were made and broken, and tensions between settlers and Native American tribes escalated. One of the most important treaties of the era was the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1851. This treaty was meant to establish peace and define territories for various tribes, including the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Lakota Sioux, and others. However, as more settlers encroached on Native American lands, the treaty's terms were frequently violated, leading to increased hostilities. Conflict was inevitable. The Sand Creek Massacre in 1864, where a Colorado militia attacked a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho village, poured more oil on the flames. This brutal attack fueled a cycle of retaliation and violence. The Fetterman Fight in 1866, where a group of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors ambushed and annihilated Captain William J. Fetterman's detachment, further inflamed tensions. Amidst this backdrop of violence and broken promises, key leaders emerged on both sides. Native American leaders like Chief Red Cloud and Chief Roman Nose led their people in fierce resistance against encroachment. On the US military side, figures like General Philip Sheridan implemented harsh policies aimed at subduing the tribes and securing the western territories for settlers. By 1868, the situation had reached a boiling point. The US military, under pressure to protect settlers and ensure safe passage along the trails, launched several campaigns to pacify the Plains tribes. Forts were established and expeditions were sent to confront the Native American warriors head-on. One such expedition was led by Major George Forsyth, a seasoned officer and scout. Major George Alexander Forsyth was no stranger to conflict, a veteran of the Civil War and an experienced frontier scout. Forsyth was tasked with leading a detachment of 50 scouts to track and engage hostile Native American forces. His mission was part of a larger strategy to protect settlers and maintain control over the contested territories. In early September 1868, Forsyth and his men set out from Fort Wallace, Kansas, venturing into the rugged terrain of northeastern Colorado. Their objective was to locate and neutralize any Native American war parties threatening the area. As they moved deeper into the hostile territory, Forsyth's scouts remained vigilant, aware that they were being watched. Forsyth's detachment was a formidable group, composed of experienced frontiersmen and Civil War veterans. Among them were Lieutenant Frederick Beecher, a courageous and determined officer, and Scout John Fitzgerald, known for his sharpshooting and resourcefulness. These men were well equipped for the challenges they would face, but even they could not anticipate the skill of the battle that awaited them. On the evening of September 16, 1868, Forsyth scouts made camp near the Arickaree River. Without realizing realizing they were being closely watched by a large force of Cheyenne and Lakota Sioux warriors, led by the formidable war chief Roman Nose. These warriors were determined to repel the invaders from their lands. As the scouts settled in for the night, the Native American forces prepared for a surprise attack at dawn. The dawn of September 17, 1868, brought with it an explosion of violence. As the first light of day crept over the horizon, Roman Nose's warriors launched a ferocious assault on Forsyth's camp. Arrows and bullets filled the air as the scouts scrambled to defend themselves. Forsyth, quickly realizing the gravity of the situation, ordered his men to take cover on a small sandbar in the middle of the river. The sandbar provided a natural defensive position, but it was far from ideal. Using their dead horses as barricades, Forsyth's men dug rifle pits and prepared for a prolonged fight. The initial attack was brutal, and several scouts, including Lieutenant Beecher, were wounded in the opening volleys. Despite their injuries, the scouts held their ground, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Amidst the chaos, individual acts of bravery stood out. Lieutenant Beecher, despite being gravely wounded, continued to command and inspire his men. Scout John Fitzgerald, known for his expeditional marksmanship, picked off attackers with deadly precision. Major Forsyth, himself wounded in both legs, remained a steadfast leader, coordinating the defense and encouraging his men to hold on. For 2 grueling days, Forsyth's scouts endured relentless attacks. The Native American warriors, led by Roman Nose and other skilled leaders, launched wave after wave of assaults, testing the scouts' defenses. Despite their superior numbers, the attackers struggled to breach the scouts' position. The sandbar became a scene of intense close quarters combat, with neither side willing to give an inch. The scouts' determination was crucial in holding off the attackers. Their position on the sandbar, though exposed, allowed them to maintain a clear field of fire. As they repelled attack after attack, they inflicted significant casualties on the Native American forces. However, their situation remained precarious. Ammunition was running low, and their food and water supplies were nearly exhausted. The 3rd day of the siege dawned, with no respite in sight. The scouts' resilience was remarkable, but their endurance had limits. Major Forsyth, despite his injuries, remained optimistic, hoping for reinforcements. Unknown to him, help was on the way. Colonel Henry Carrington, alerted by reports of the scouts' plight, had dispatched a relief force from Fort Wallace. The relief force, led by Colonel Carrington, faced its own challenges, navigating difficult terrain and the constant threat of ambush. The march was grueling, but the determination to rescue Forsyth and his men drove them forward. As they neared Beecher Island, the sounds of battle reached their ears, spurring them to quicken their pace. As the relief force closed in, the Native American warriors, exhausted and demoralized by the scouts' stubborn defense, began to withdraw. The arrival of Carrington's men marked the end of the siege and the beginning of a strategic retreat for the Native American forces. Forsyth's scouts, battered but unbroken, had held out against overwhelming odds.